I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwantlen, Kaksi, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations, who are all a part of the Stolo First Nation, on whose land I live and learn. I'd also like to thank the BC History of Nurses Society for inviting me to share these findings and for their contributions to this work. On my very first day in class in the master's program at Trinity Western University, I met Dr. Sonia Greitma, and she introduced me to the field of historical nursing research. I knew right then that I wanted to pursue study in this area. Historical research presented for me the power to learn from story and the challenge to reflect on how these histories are told and their influence on who we are today. When I came to Dr. Greitma with the notion of exploring my great-grandmother, Doris Nichols' experience of training to become a nurse, all I knew was that she had trained in Bella Bella's missionary hospital and then graduated from the Vancouver General Hospital Training School for Nurses. Dr. Greitma graciously and enthusiastically agreed to guide me along this journey. What I discovered while I explored, recounted, and analyzed my ancestors' early nursing experiences were that her narrative was astonishingly interconnected with the broader histories, such as the history of BC's education of nursing, the Methodist missions in BC, the Health Sick Nation, and Canada's colonial histories. My presentation today is a highlight of these findings and stories that surfaced in my thesis work. In the literature review, I found that hospital-trained nurses had arrived on the northwest coast of newly formed British Columbia in the late 1800s, and they quickly set up nursing training schools. Broadly stated, they came in connection with organized Christian missionary movements, as trained nurses were deemed well-suited for the demands of women's outpost missionary work. However, in most of the historical studies reviewed, the nurse's experience was not the intent of the research. Rather, studies focused on the delivery of Euro-Canadian healthcare among the First Nations and settler communities, the interconnected nature of spiritual care and medical care, the Indigenous experience, and the missionary physician's experience, as well as healthcare as a tool for colonization. The existing research did establish, though, that missionary nurses practiced under challenging and complex conditions, including isolation, high expectations, physically demanding work, all while navigating relationships fraught with gender inequalities and racial tensions. Beginning in curiosity, with a desire to know Doris's narrative, I used the conceptual framework of a social history as defined by Joe Buck to define the scope of the study as an inclusive structure for reinterpreting the past and experiences of ordinary people, moments, and events through various thematic prisms. The choice to use a social history framework was grounded in my access to private collection primary sources, which were personal in nature and reflected the social constructs of the time. I moved through the data as a careful observer with awareness of my own biases. I listened and looked, what story does the data want to tell? This diagram illustrated the cyclical and overlapping phases that I moved through with the data while I read and reread, interpreted, reinterpreted, wrote, and rewrote. My privilege in this research is my access to the private collection. My data collection began with semi-structured interviews. I used the methods put forth by Gertrude Boschma to collect this evidence. For this study, these oral histories were used as a form of primary data and as means to adding meaning to the private collection, and not as much as a methodological approach. In total, I conducted 4 interviews with my 3 great aunts who were Doris's daughters and niece. From that place, I spent time analyzing the private collection and examined journals, poems, and notes written by Doris, certificates, pictures, and short unpublished family biographies. In total, I had over 30 private collection artifacts. The most powerful of the collection were the photographs. Where the journal entries were insightful but limited to quotes such as, "Nursing duties were performed," and lists of procedures and cases that she assisted on. The pictures, however, held depth to examine, from the background to the foreground to what was written on the backs. In addition, I used 53 primary sources for this study. The data varied from photographs to personal and organizational documents to newspaper clips and periodicals. The data found in the United Churches of Canada's collection Up and Down the Coast.ca and Chilliwack Press archives were of noteworthy. In 1905, at age 2, Doris immigrated with her family from England to Canada, where she grew up in Chilliwack, BC. They lived a simple existence and were active members in their local Methodist church and mission work. In wake of the Great War and the Spanish flu, Doris applied to the renowned Vancouver General Hospital Training School for Nurses. Though no direct correlation could be made, Doris had been an eyewitness to the tragedies of the Spanish flu's impact on her community. She watched as her mother nursed her own sisters and neighbors through the illness. At the time of Doris's application, the ever-expanding VGH school had implemented more stringent entrance requirements, one of which was physical fitness, where prospective students underwent 2 physical assessments. Doris received an interview with VGH, however, was denied entrance because she was found to have an enlarged thyroid and a notable exothalamus. Instead of returning home to Chilliwack, she remained in Vancouver, finding work as a housekeeper in a private residence. A guest of her employer, deducted to be a Miss Myrtle Wheeler, a Methodist missionary nurse on furlough from China, suggested that Doris apply to the R.W. Large Memorial Hospital Training School for Nurses in Bella Bella. As the story was told, Doris did, and she was accepted. Shortly after, she was heading north. In late June 1921, 18-year-old Doris Nichols arrived on the dock of the R.W. Large Memorial Hospital. When she arrived in Bella Bella, the island community consisted of 350 Helsik and a handful of Canadian Methodist missionaries. The school consisted of nurse matron Miss Wilson and 1 other nurse probate. They were supported by Dr. Darby, who served the mission hospital for a total of 45 years. This map illustrates the Methodist mission in British Columbia prior to 1924. In my research, I also found significant connections between the farming community of Chilliwack and the island village of Bella Bella in connection with the mission. It's important to draw attention here to the concurrent Indigenous history of the Helsik. During the 1800s, the rise of non-Indigenous trade-based economy, the spread of devastating communicable diseases, and colonial policies were nation-altering for the Helsik people. Bella Bella, therefore, was a convergent of the survivors, a new village that was built with the mission hospital at the center, and was a fusion of Euro-Canadian, Christian, and Indigenous ways of living. By centering this study around Doris Nichols and the collection of primary sources, I was able to explore the relatively unknown spaces where ordinary and extraordinary met. This is a remarkable photo of connection and participation in social events, bonding nurses with the local people. Dr. Darby believed that outings such as beach picnics, boating, fishing, and swimming were as much about suspending homesickness and loneliness as they were about building relationships. It was actually a recommendation of the BC Graduate Nurses Association that social diversions and special forms of recreation should be provided in the nurse's home. Even in 1920, it was understood that all work and no play was not a healthy balance. For Doris, her time in training gave her pause to reminisce. During her last year in Bella Bella, she was inspired to write a poem, Memories of Childhood, which ended with, "Joy to us all the seasons did loan. Oh, why is it now we wander and roam so far away into regions unknown, but forever with us are memories of home."
Yeah.
The hospital that Doris trained at boasted modernization with a generator for electricity and running water. With 28 beds, there was surgical capacity, a maternity room, and fresh air wards for tuberculosis treatment. However, this newly built hospital also bore witness to colonization with racially segregated wards, which was a variance from the hospital's original one-room predecessor. Paradoxically, this hospital was situated on reservation land, which to this day is the unceded territory of the Helsik, and yet it served the coastal Central Coast and all who needed medical attention without exception. Another unique aspect of her training was the medical mission boat and the practice of moving the hospital to rivers inlet canneries during the fishing season. This illustrated an example of the medical and spiritual care following the seasonal movements of the indigenous coastal people. To highlight the state of nursing education at the time, the BC Graduate Nurses Association had made strides in securing the protected title registered nurse. However, in order to register, one must have appropriate training. Therefore, nursing leaders were working tirelessly to address the issue of a lack of standardization in what constituted acceptable nurses training. Heated discussions were going on regarding the appropriate size of schools' affiliated hospitals, the minimal entrance requirements, and expectations regarding the quality and quantity of the training itself. To address related concerns, Helen Randall, the first nursing registrar of BC, began surveying hospitals around the province. All schools, including the nursing school at Bella Bella, came under scrutiny as leaders had made it mandatory for small training schools to either affiliate with larger institutions or close down. Students could therefore complete 2 years at a smaller school and then transfer to VGH or Royal Jubilee Hospital in Victoria for their final year. By 1922, and possibly earlier, the Bella Bella Nursing School was affiliated with VGH, meaning that it had complied with the standardized regulations, including that the nurse supervisor be an RN, and that the hospital have in its employment at least 2 graduate nurses. This photo, in this photo, Doris is the 4th nurse from the doctor. I believe that this picture is representative of the changes met to meet the new requirements. 3 of the nurses in the picture are in training, which makes this the largest class photo the school had ever seen. Dr. Darby here believed that the R.W. Large Memorial Hospital Training School for Nurses was in fact the smallest school in the province in 1922, although this could not be verified. I do love that despite Helen Randall's concern about small nursing schools, I found a quote from her acknowledging a young woman who has spent 2 years in a small hospital and 1 in a large is actually a better all-around nurse than the one who trains solely in the large hospital.
That's right.
The distinctiveness, even the sacred aspect of Doris's intimate mentorship experience was in part due to the training where women were educated in the dual role of nurse and missionary. All aspects of life were conducted in connection with the mission, and the nurses worked, worshiped, learned, and lived together. In this photograph, Doris is the nurse in the center. There seems to be a moment of humor and connection happening. In Doris's note on the back, she refers to herself and fellow students as hope, faith, and charity, highlighting the relationship between their missionary and nursing duties and with each other. From the start of the nursing training school in 1903, the stated intent of the school was to train up their own nursing workforce as a means to supply nurses to the Methodist mission hospitals and other Methodist institutions, and not merely to supplement nursing work with students. To that end, continued efforts were taken to ensure the nurses were taught to a high standard that also reflected their ministry calling. Prayer, Bible reading, and attendance in worship services were integral parts of the nurse's life while in training. Nurses participated in corporate community church services, taught Bible classes, and led hymn singing at the hospital for those who were confined in bed. It was also routine for all medical procedures to begin in prayer with the patient and for the nurse to pray before entering a patient's room. I found significant data to show that there was a fluidity between the nurses that trained at the Methodist hospitals and those who later worked at various Methodist mission settings. A prime example is a Miss Sarah Elton, who taught at the Kalkowitz Residential School and then trained to become a nurse at the Port Simpson Mission Hospital. In 1903, she took what she had learned and started and ran the Bella Bella Nursing Training School. In 1910, she moved to Kitimat, where for 17 years she nursed at the Kitimat Missionary Residential School. Doris also nursed at the Methodist Hospital in Port Simpson, Bella Coola, and at Kalkowitz after graduation, as did several other graduates from the Bella Bella Hospital. Ultimately, I never learned my grandmother's personal motivations for entering nursing training. However, I am certain that Doris took what she had learned and carried it forward in her life. Doris may have chosen Bella Bella as a means to become a nurse, but she left with a heart for missions and its work. For the rest of her life, she remained involved in missionary work at home and abroad. Doris's path to nursing was altered when she was denied admittance to the Vancouver General Hospital School for Nurses based on her health. Not deterred, Doris accepted a divinely timed offer and decided to train in the remote Bella Bella. Her upbringing made her a suitable candidate to enroll at the mission hospital, and being English and Methodist likely opened doors for Doris to go to Bella Bella that may have been closed to others. She trained at a dramatic change point in nursing education for the nursing school in Bella Bella. The R.W. Large Memorial Hospital, affiliated with the Vancouver General Hospital, resulted in a cyclical journey for Doris, as she ended up completing her 3rd year of training in the institution that had earlier deemed her unfit for practice. Ironically, her RN certificate is signed by Helen Randall, who ultimately contributed to the closing of the small school in 1935. Upon graduation, Doris was accepted into an elite group of nurses as the 9th graduate in the school's first 20 years. In Laurie Meyer-Dree's profound work, Healing Histories, she states, these stories are more than historical facts. They embody an opportunity, a process for understanding a period of time that had not been fully described or appreciated, a time that occasionally has slipped into shadow. I found this photograph in my preliminary search of the United Church of Canada's digital archive. I never met my great-grandmother, but I instantly recognized this woman in the photograph as family.
Mm-hmm.
The photo exemplifies the connection between Doris, nursing, and this unnamed man who is identified in the archive as Helsik. As they stand together in front of the Methodist Mission Hospital with the Pacific Ocean in the background. This photo speaks volumes to people who are nameless and unmentioned, but who shared a past and a history. This photo compelled me to study nurses who were present, but under or unacknowledged, for the purpose of giving voice to nurses and those who have been silenced by the past. The single direct care story that was passed down by Doris is the retelling of the time that she attended a leg amputation case. Doris shared with her eldest daughter that she had been charged with the task of carrying away the leg. She told her Audrey that she recalls standing, holding the leg, taking in the gravity of the moment. In Doris's journal, there was simply an entry, May 4th, 1923, amputation of leg, assisting Dr. Darby. The historical research approach has taken me to a place of discovery that is deeper than the stories of intrigue and has given me an appreciation for how people of a different time and place lived in connection with one another, and taught me how this can contribute to the ways we live and work with each other today. My sincerest hope is that this study will encourage researchers to take up this work and expand upon it, to engage with others in conversation that will inform their current perspective and help provide context for nursing professions to acknowledge the contemporary need for reconciliation and engage in building restorative relationships. I take into my nursing practice the ongoing intentionality to listen for the silenced voice, to recognize the biased one, and to recognize the biased one. I would like to take this moment again to thank the BC History of Nursing Society, who supported me in this study, and for all those who have come to listen today. I extend my deepest appreciation.